this video, I'm going to talk a bit more about this issue of algorithmic bias, and then I'm going to move on to talking about a pretty unrelated issue in the ethics of AI, which is whether we'll ever get to the point where we have to treat artificial intelligences as moral agents with rights. So we'll start in with the algorithmic bias stuff. Okay, so here's a fun new technology that you may get to encounter as or when you enter the job market. HireVue. So companies like Unilever, like big Fortune 500 companies who get thousands and thousands of applications for jobs, are looking for ways to make that recruiting process more efficient. And Unilever is using this package called HireVue. As I understand it, the basic idea is that you, the potential hiree, will record a video of yourself talking into the camera, answering standard interview questions. Then, based on that recording, they will do kind of machine learning analysis of your speech patterns and the little micro expressions of your face, and then use that data to compare you to the top performers in that company. And the idea is that they're able to predict whether you'll be one of the top performers in the company or like be a high performer for them based on the degree of match between your speech patterns and your facial expressions and the facial expressions of their superstars. I guess the idea is that facial expression conveys attitude. You know, are you enthusiastic? Do you like make intense eye contact with the camera and that kind of thing? So the score that HireVue generates is by no means the only criterion for hiring. It's not like they just sort of believe that number and go with it, but it is a major factor as they describe it in the hiring process. It gets you past that first cut of, like, you know, there's 1,000 applications. They're going to cut it down to 200. Maybe they're just relying on HireVue scores to make that initial cut, and then you get to talk to a human being, hopefully. So above and beyond the sheer social oddness of just filming your face and as part of a job interview, I think it's quite reasonable to worry about the kind of issues that I talked about in the last video, which are correlations that don't really track what you're hoping that the neural network is tracking. So it's quite unclear what exactly HireVue is picking up on in terms of your facial expressions and your speech mannerisms. So is it that you happen to use a phrase that gets passed around at Yale or something? Is it that there was, you know, the top performers in the company all have some peculiarity that you happen to either have or not have? Now, it's worth noting, or for example, one more example, just to drive this home, maybe the top performers all come from a certain social class or ethnic background, and what HireVue is actually picking up on is, do your mannerisms match the people from that socioeconomic status or those demographics? That's a thing that I worried about when I read about HireVue. To be fair, you go to their website and check out their pitch. They specifically claim that HireVue will help avoid that kind of biased hiring. So they specifically pitch this as a way of increasing diversity and finding just the right person for just the right job by, AI-driven insights proven to reduce bias. This is from the HireVue website. So the thought is, or at least their pitch is, this algorithm doesn't have the kind of unconscious biases that maybe your standard HR interviewers have. So it's picking up on things that really matter rather than the color of your skin or the way that you sort of talk or something like that, right? Yeah, so that's their claim. I find it hard to imagine how that works. I find their description of the actual way in which they think higher view reduces bias to be a bit unclear. It's entirely possible that they have some extremely clever anti-bias sort of techniques baked into the system. So it might be that they specifically exclude things like the color of your skin or various mannerisms that are associated with different ethnicities. Maybe it's not open source software. They do not tell you. I mean, it's proprietary software, of course. So they're not coming out and telling everybody how exactly the thing works. So who knows? This kind of thing is, and higher view is not the only example of this, but I think it's an interesting one. This fits into a larger discussion about algorithmic bias in general. Sorry, when I'm saying algorithm, the neural networks are a type of algorithm. I don't remember if I said that. Okay, so there's a bunch of researchers pointing out, this has become a kind of commonplace in the discussion of the ethics of AI, this thought that's perfectly encapsulated by the headline here, bias in, bias out. If the training data that you're using, the historical data that you're using to train your neural network is recording a world riddled with bias, if you can imagine, then the decisions and the correlations that the algorithm is going to make are going to reproduce that bias unless or until you very specifically and intentionally make sure that it doesn't. So there's a debate about how best to do that. There are several, there are techniques, there are proposals, there's an ongoing conversation about ways of trying to filter out existing biases in the world, but it's not easy. So if the top performers in your company say have the right sort of accent or the right sort of skin color, or they happen to have the right sort of facial expressions because that's correlated with being from a certain demographic or socioeconomic background, it's pretty tough to, you can eliminate those as specific factors, but then those specific factors are going to be correlated with a bunch of other stuff that it might also be picking up on. So this is the general problem of reproducing bias in the algorithms. And again, what makes this so tricky is the opaque nature of the neural networks, right? It's not like somebody's sitting down and saying, if somebody's from such and such ethnic background, minus 15 points. That's nowhere represented in the internal mechanics of the machine. What we don't have access to, however, is how they are doing it, right? What are these algorithms picking up on? And it's very difficult to reconstruct that. So this problem of bias in, bias out is not an easy one to sort out. Okay. In the reading this week, Muller gives us an example of an automatic recruiting algorithm that was being used by Amazon, and exactly this happened. So they had a list of their sort of top performers in the company. So who did we hire and it really worked out? And who did we hire and then you had to fire them 6 months later? And that training data had way more men than women in it. And it was largely because of hiring biases. It was bias on the part of the human recruiters who were deciding who to offer a job, and the people evaluating their job performance. So, and I don't think it's up for any kind of serious scientific debate whether women are evaluated more harshly in a great many aspects of life than men are. If you look at the way people sort of get in positions in a very high ranking like operas and stuff, or like an orchestra, they've had to institute sort of literally blinded auditions because way more men were getting the positions, but when you can't see who's playing, just as many women get them. So this is an ongoing problem in society, and that ongoing problem was reflected in the training data that Amazon fed to its algorithm, and then the algorithm just reproduced the bias. This algorithm was taken out of the hiring process in 2017, which is good. But it's also really recent, right? Like, this is not like this was a problem in the 1990s and they've completely cleared this issue out. This is stuff that is currently ongoing. Okay. Another somewhat related concern. It's not exactly the same as algorithmic bias, but it is a kind of ethical question. I think it's an interesting ethical question in the use of AI. It's the version of AI that I think most of us encounter most directly in our day-to-day lives, which is what's sometimes called persuasive technology. So in a 2017 article in The Economist, it was claimed that data has displaced oil as the most valuable commodity on Earth. Used to be the most, the total value of all the oil was the biggest single commodity. Now it's data. There is some debate about that. I'm sure it depends on how you quantify value, but nonetheless, nobody disagrees that data has become an absolutely enormous business. Just gigantic quantities of data are being constantly collected about all of us all the time. So literally everything that you do on the internet, what you look at, how long you look at it, who your friends are, is all being collected very, very extensively by gigantic tech companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, so on. And the point of that collecting that data is not just so that they can be better buds to us. It's to either know your interests and therefore know how to keep your attention. So this is the standard thing on YouTube. Hopefully you've heard something about the kind of YouTube suggestion algorithm, which is a machine learning algorithm that finds out about your preferences and uses that information to suggest things that'll keep you on YouTube. Or Google, whose main strategy here seems to be to find out a lot about you and then use that information to give targeted ads to you. So to ads that are very specific to you as a potential consumer. Shoshana Zuboff calls this surveillance capitalism. She argues that this started it's got rolling in about 2001, right around the time of the, I don't know if this is still current lingo, but the dot-com bust. So the dot-com bust was a kind of systemic crash in the value of a whole bunch of internet companies. There was companies that were doing stuff on the internet were wildly overvalued for how much revenue they were producing, and they all kind of came crashing down in 2001. A lot of people lost a lot of money, and Google, in that kind of moment of crisis, had to figure out a new revenue model. And what they realized was what they were at the time thinking of as data exhaust. So just people are typing stuff into Google. Google's trying its very, very best to give them good answers. But the things that they were typing in was just sort of, it's information, but they didn't view it as valuable in any important way. And then some clever soul realized that the pattern of searches that you enter into Google gives a really interesting profile of you as a person, right? What are your interests? What are you looking for? What are you after? And if you were to, say, build a model of what kind of consumer you are and then sell the results of that model to advertisers, say to advertisers, look, I can get you guys who are obsessed with model airplanes. I can get you 150,000 people who are just loving the model airplane world, and I'm going to put your ad front and center on their Google results. So like that was how they monetized people using their service, and a ton of big companies have followed suit. So I think what makes this ethically interesting, this all sounds creepy, right? Like it to me, anyway, personally, it's got this skeevy feel to it, right? Like, oh, I'm being manipulated, right? Like they're collecting hundreds of thousands of data points about each and every one of us, running those data points through enormously complex machine learning algorithms, running on massive banks of computers. They're like this is like sort of, and using all that to nudge and shift and craft our behavior in a way that is so gentle and subtle that it, generally speaking, doesn't rise to the level of consciousness. Like you don't, I mean, sometimes you see an ad, you're like, oh, it's weird, I was just talking about that. But generally speaking, I don't know about you, but I just go about my day on the internet not thinking or not feeling like I'm being pressured into being interested in certain things. You know, when you go through, I go through my Twitter feed and I'm like, oh, here's some stuff that I'm interested in. The fact that that Twitter feed or your Facebook feed or your YouTube suggestions are all being intensely sculpted according to a profile that's been developed about you as an individual, typically that's not going through my head when I'm doing this stuff. So it doesn't feel like, and at no point are they forcing anybody to click on anything. So if they were, this is not the age of, you know, kicking down your door and dragging you off. This is not, I mean, that still happens to people, of course, but that's not the style of power that's being, this is a fundamentally different style of power that's being imposed on people. And it's a style of power that really requires our participation in a deep way, right? You could just stop using Facebook. You could just stop using Google, I suppose. I mean, it would be massively inconvenient for me, but I'm voluntarily on those sites all the time. So it's the ethics of this are quite odd. This is all perfectly legal, by the way. So this is all, none of this is like, you know, interfering in elections might technically be illegal, but this like gathering 100,000 publicly available data points on you, building a model of your personality that's probably so intimate that your psychologist would be shocked how much they know, and using it to serve you up things that are highly likely to keep you on YouTube or highly likely to get you to spend your money. None of that is illegal. We are voluntarily participating in this in an important way, often without informed consent. So a lot of people aren't kind of consciously aware of the structure, but I am, and I'm still doing it. I don't know. So I think it's an interesting ethical question about how reasonable is this as a behavior for these large scale companies? How ethical or unethical is, as Zuboff says, surveillance capitalism? Okay. All right, so just to kind of sample, there's actually a really rich and robust sort of literature on ethical questions about the usage of AI. Those were just a tiny little sample. It's fascinating, but I want to do one last thing before we're done today, which is talk about something that's certainly less urgent, because it's about a possibility that hasn't been realized yet. But I think it's philosophically very, very deep and quite compelling, at least to my mind. So this question is about artificial intelligences and their moral status. So at what point does an AI get sophisticated or complex enough that we have to start treating it like a person, like it's got a point of view, like it's got rights? I don't think there's any AI on the planet or even any kind of like proposals for AI that even come close to that level, right? So there's nothing today that I'm morally concerned about. There's no algorithm. I'm like, oh, it's feelings. I care about your feelings. But given the pace that we're at right now, I don't think that it's impossible that we might get there in our lifetimes. So this is maybe not as far off a sci-fi style possibility as it might seem. Okay, so I think it's interesting to think about other kinds of things that we've either afforded moral status to or not. Historically, in the Western world, people have been pretty stingy with affording moral status. Very often, it's not, I mean, just being human hasn't been enough for altogether too many people. But Descartes, for example, thought that all animals are just fundamentally just kind of complex mechanisms. And he thought our bodies are similarly just complex mechanisms, except for the fact that we've got a God-given soul. So your conscious experience of the world, your subjectivity and your perspective, Descartes thought, was a unique feature of humans, not something that's shared by all animals. It's something only humans have got. It's gifted by God, and it's grounded in a non-physical soul. Like, this is not made of matter. It's like there's some other kind of stuff that your soul is composed of, and it interacts with your body. So that, for Descartes, that meant animals have no moral status. That is, in exactly the same way that you wouldn't grant moral status to a clock or a printer. If you smash your printer, you might be sad that you can't print anymore, but you're not like, oh, the poor printer, right? You don't worry about the printer's point of view because the printer doesn't have a point of view. It hasn't got consciousness. It hasn't got feelings. It's not a moral agent, or it's not the subject of moral concern because it doesn't have consciousness. It's just a machine. So for quite some time, this was a fairly common view. Animals are just machines. Most people in science and philosophy don't buy this idea that the mind is a non-material substance. The dominant view amongst scientists and philosophers is that everything about us is somehow grounded in our physical being, our bodies, our brains, our nervous system, stuff like that. And the more we learn about animal nervous systems, the more likely it seems that whatever it is that's making us have consciousness is probably making them have it too. The debate right now is more about which animals have conscious experience rather than whether any of them have conscious experience. Again, it's a whole rich debate, but that's certainly the direction that it's been trending in. So the claim that animals might have conscious experience has become pretty common, and the debate is moving on to, like, do octopi have conscious experience? A lot of people think probably. Other mammals, probably. Insects, maybe. But if we accept that A, is nothing magical about consciousness, that it's something grounded in our body. B, that you don't have to be organized just like a human being. Like, you don't have to be a Homo sapien in order to have conscious experience. Then that opens up the possibility that you could have an artificial consciousness. So we can't simply assume that artificial intelligence can't have whatever we've got that makes us something that you probably should be morally concerned about. By the way, if you don't believe in ethics, then this is all moot for you anyway. But I'm assuming that you believe that you should have some moral concern about other human beings. And now we're asking the question, what else should you have moral concern about? Probably not printers. Good chance octopi. And maybe someday artificial intelligences too. So, but this takes us to some really fundamental questions about ethics and morality. So what grounds moral concern? What makes something worthy of moral concern? A bit uncomfortable with the word worthy, but I don't know how else to put this. Like, what makes it such that we should be concerned about something in terms of its welfare and its well-being and its flourishing? I've been using consciousness, but that term is famously hard to define. If you asked 4 philosophers what consciousness is, you'll get 6 answers. And it's certainly hard to quantify or measure. We don't have quantitative measures of consciousness at this point. And maybe that's not even the most important thing that maybe consciousness isn't the central thing for being something that we should be morally concerned about. I haven't given you an argument to that effect yet. I might in a minute. But let's throw around a couple things that might ground this kind of moral concern. I mean, so one thing is all of the AI that currently exists is super specialized. And for me, at least, that kind of intuitively disqualifies it as being something I'm going to be morally concerned about. So this is a picture of Deep Blue. Deep Blue was the first computer to beat the best human chess player. And it displays a kind of intelligence. It's really, really good at chess. But does having that type of super specialized intelligence make you something that we should be morally concerned about. I don't think Deep Blue has feelings. I don't think it has a point of view. I don't think it has consciousness. So, it's really the fact that it's specialized puts it in the machine category, maybe. And then the long-term goal of AI, one of the main long-term goals of AI, is to come up with general artificial intelligence. That is an intelligence that can do lots of different things in lots of different domains. And maybe that's part of what constitutes, something as a robust agent, right? An agency might be the thing that we're after here. What makes something worthy of moral concern? It's an agent if it can kind of do stuff in the world. Maybe that's it. Another line of thinking here is maybe self-making is an important part of the story. So one of the very interesting features of living things is that we build ourselves from scratch. You take in food and air and you build a body out of it. And the way that you have built that body is unique to you, and it's unique to your circumstances. This is the conversation about development in biology. And so in self-making, we sort of define a boundary between us and the universe. We constitute ourselves as a whole. We are this ongoing process. And humans do this to a degree that no other animal does, right? Remember that stuff from Alison Gopnik about the chickens and the crows, where the crow has to self-construct a mind in a much deeper way than the chicken does. And we have to do that much more than the crow does. So humans have this amazing ability to kind of build a mind, and maybe that's part of the story. I'm really just kind of tossing things out here for consideration. I think maybe each of these is part of some larger story. But if an artificial intelligence was general, and if it was creatively constructing itself over time in a way that gave it a sense of an inside and an outside, that I'm not sure that I could confidently, in the same way that I was like, screw my print, I'll smash my printer if I want. I'm not sure if I could, in good conscience, smash such a thing, which is the first glimmer of moral concern. And maybe it's that first thing I said. Maybe it's consciousness. Maybe having a subjective experience is the thing that really makes something worthy of moral concern. Some ethicists argue, so that if your ethical theory is along the following lines, some ethicists think that what's right or wrong depends on what generates the most happiness and prevents the most suffering. So that's kind of broadly the utilitarian picture of ethics. Happiness and suffering, do the stuff that makes happy and not the stuff that makes suffering. So I take it that has to be conscious happiness and suffering, right? The happiness that counts is the happiness that is experienced by someone or something. So if you don't have a conscious experience of the world, your happiness doesn't really count on those terms. So if that's the right account of ethics, maybe consciousness is the central thing for determining whether something is a moral agent or worthy of the status of a moral consideration or not. But as I mentioned, consciousness is notoriously hard to define. It's one of the deepest scientific mysteries there is right now. But there is interesting scientific work ongoing about it. So I don't think that we should consider consciousness to be kind of this, contra some people in the philosophy literature who say this is just a mystery beyond our ken permanently. I think there is interesting work ongoing, so maybe it's something that we could understand and one day build into a machine. Whatever the answers to these questions are, I do think that they have really profound consequences, not just for how we treat artificial intelligences, but how we think about ourselves. If we make something that's like ourselves, it will be like a mirror in which we can see what's most central to us. Okay, that's it for this week.